Good evening, everyone. Bonsoir, tout le monde. Guten Abend allerseits. My name is Benjamin Becker. I'm the Managing Director of America's Nordrhein-Westphalia, and on behalf of our partners and friends of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, the Higher Education Department of the French Embassy in Germany, and the Center for Advanced Strategic Integration and Area Studies of the University of Bonn, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's discussion on transatlantic security and new hope. The Star Wars geeks among you may know that was an intended pun of episode 4. When we started to plan this, I couldn't spare you this one. When we started to plan this panel, it was yet unclear whether the Munich Security Conference would be able to take place and in which format. Now, having watched the speeches of President Biden, of Chancellor Merkel, and President Macron at the past weekend's Munich Security Conference Special Edition, Digital Edition, I'm excited that we chose just the right panelists and just the right panel for you tonight. It is my great and our great pleasure on behalf of all organizers to welcome on the digital stage General Ben Hodges, representing the US military perspective, Dr. Bruno Tertrais, who will talk about the French political perspective, and Hans Stein, who will unite the German and the European transatlantic perspective right from the heart of Brussels. They will be introduced and moderated by our trusted partner, Sumi Somaskanda, who is with Deutsche Welle, and who has a distinct German-American perspective as an American journalist and reporter living in Germany and working on both sides of the Atlantic. Now on tonight's proceedings. As we have a lot of thematic ground to cover, we will start right into the discussion, so no lengthy intro statements, just substance immediately. Sumi will ask her questions, but as always, we want to make this as interactive as possible. Please feel invited to submit your questions at any time and writing at any time. You can do that by clicking on the F&A button or the Q&A button at the bottom. And Sumi will integrate this into the moderation. 2 final remarks before we start. First of all, thanks to all teams and all organizations involved. In our case, that's my colleague Katharina, who does her Zoom magic in the background as we are speaking, but there are also other colleagues and teams in the background. This is always a team effort, and you can't do it alone. And if you enjoyed tonight, please come back to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, the Institut Français, and CASIS of the University of Bonn, and of course, America House. We all have websites, we all have printed or digital programs. You will find us, I'm sure. And now, without further ado, great pleasure to have you all here tonight. Enjoy the discussion. Over to Sumi. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, for that introduction, and good evening to everyone from my end as well. And it is great to be back here with the America House and the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung, but also tonight in partnership with CASIS and the Institut Français. And there is so much to talk about, so I want to get right to introducing our guests so we can get right to the topics, starting with Hans Stein. He is the director of the representation of the state of North Rhine-Westphalia in the European Union, as Benjamin mentioned, in Brussels. And Mr. Stein is a member of the Ludwig Erhard Foundation as well, an alum of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, was previously the vice president. Good evening to you, Mr. Stein. And now we'll also introduce Ben Hodges. He is the Pershing Chair in Strategic Studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis, CEPA. And General Hodges, because he served as the commander of the US Army in Europe until 2017. Welcome to you as well. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Bruno Tertrais. He's the Deputy Director of the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique in Paris. And Mr. Tertrais previously worked at, among other posts, NATO's Parliamentary Assembly and for the Ministry of Defense as well. So again, welcome to all 3 of you. Really terrific guests, as Benjamin said, to talk about strategic policy, defense within the prism of the transatlantic relationship. Mr. Stein, if we could start with you, sitting in the heart of Brussels there, we have been talking about a new start, a restart of the transatlantic relationship. After seeing what we did at the Munich Security Conference, so the speeches from the German and French and American leaders, what does that restart look like to you so far?
First of all, let me thank you for the invitation to participate in this debate. It's a great honor and a pleasure, as I am not representing a member state in Brussels, but one of the German Länder. Even though North Rhine-Westphalia, if it was independent, would be the 7th largest economy in the European Union and the 19th largest worldwide. So from this perspective, I can say that even not being a member state, but there was a big relief after the American election. Maybe let's start like with the style question. I mean, now there is an administration now that speaks in a manner that we are used to debate. So that is the fundament, the groundwork for a structured discussion on all the topics that we have to deal with, be it climate change, be it China, be it overcoming the pandemic, the crisis. At least now there is a way that you are used to exchange ideas and perspectives. So this is the big relief, and also the expectation. And I think with the first signs that President Biden has sent, like returning back to the Paris Climate Treaty, returning back to WHO, with his experience, with his appearance at the Munich Security Conference, that was a good start from the American side. And now Europe has to find and give the answer.
Just to follow up on that, there was a lawmaker here in Berlin who said, the adults are finally back in the room. I would say that they've certainly aged over the last 4 years and have become perhaps a bit wiser. But how have your expectations, Mr. Stein, changed there as a representative of, as you said, a very economically and politically powerful state in Germany, but also from the Brussels perspective? What's your expectation now? How's that changed?
Well, the expectation now is that we find a way for a structured dialogue, and that we are working on all these issues together, meaning together, that there are less Twitter surprises, and this is laying common ground. So there we are pretty hopeful that we will find common solutions for all these problems that I have addressed. And I see more now the effort or the challenge. It's more a challenge on the European side to answer to US ideas. I think it was a very, very good sign that the Secretary of State Blinken participated in this digital meeting of EU foreign ministers on Monday. This is a good way to start.
General Hodges, I saw you nodding briefly there as Mr. Stein was saying it's time for Europe to answer. So maybe I can ask you how you see, what your perspective is on this in terms of a restart for the transatlantic relationship, and then we can zoom in on security and defense.
Well, thanks, Sumi. Obviously, I'm personally pleased to see the different sort of tone or the outreach by the new administration, the very clear, strong statement about American commitment to our alliance, American commitment to Europe, a willingness and an intention to work with the European Union, as well as re-entering or affirming our participation in things like the Paris Accord, World Health Organization, already reaching out to the Iranians for possibly restarting JCPOA or something like that. So these are all very positive developments. And of course, Hans is correct that there's a style aspect to this, that we can already see a more traditional sort of way of approaching our friends and allies. in a more civil way. However, nobody should be confused or distracted by that from the fact that the administration is going to have very, very high, already does have very high expectations of our European partners and our allies in all domains, in diplomacy, in military, and economy. The administration is going to have does have high expectations, particularly of Germany and France. I was encouraged by what I saw Friday, what the president had to say. I was somewhat encouraged by what Chancellor Merkel had to say with regards to some clarity about the Kremlin's behavior. But then a very, very light touch when it came to China. President Macron almost barely did not mention the Kremlin or China. And so I think this is going to be an area where three great nations are going to have to work closely together to figure out how do we deal with the approach of the Chinese Communist Party, and also how the Kremlin, Ukrainian soldiers are getting killed every week, despite the so-called Minsk process and ceasefire, every week. And then, of course, today in Tbilisi, we saw a crackdown by the Georgian leadership, completely funded and backed up by the Kremlin. So the president has challenges.
Mr. Tertrais, we heard General Hodges there say that the Biden administration is waiting for clear answers from European allies and partners. Are those answers forthcoming?
I think some of them are, not all of them. First of all, let me emphasize that I'm aware that my country, actually my president, sometimes has some ambiguous words about NATO. But he went as far as saying during the MSC, I believe in NATO. No, I didn't know that NATO was a religion or that NATO was some kind of God, but that these were clear words. I think he was worried about the state of the Atlantic Alliance, given the divergence of interest between the Trump administration, Erdogan's Turkey, and France in Syria. But I think that's passed us to some extent. Second thing, I think what the French president is very keen on doing is, and that may sound a bit weird for a French person, but it's about acting more than saying. Regarding Russia, you will find that the French have been very clear in enhancing their cooperation, the defense and security cooperation with the Baltic countries, and giving a not so insignificant contribution to the reinforced defense of the enhanced forward presence of the Baltic states. Now, where he does hesitate is in talking about Russia as an adversary. That is true, that he does not want to, allegedly because it would lessen the chances for diplomacy and dialogue. I'm not sure it's the right sense, but hey, I prefer a country that does not talk too much than a country that does not do too much. Where we may have divergences is how NATO handles China. I don't think it would be very difficult to agree on issues such as technology transfer, Chinese investments in Europe, all issues that are going to be very important in the transatlantic relationship, which are fairly new as compared to what they were 20 years ago, for instance. Geoeconomics is nothing new in transatlantic relations, but the Chinese part is new. So it's not going to be very difficult to agree between the United States and its European partners on how to handle China economically speaking, I think technologically speaking, but I think France is going to be, and other countries are going to be hesitant in China taking too much place in the NATO strategic concepts. So paradoxically, in coming back to Russia, I think in France, you'll find a country which is always keen to say, hey, NATO is primarily about Article 5. This is the core task of the alliance. Now, I'm aware that it's not the only one, but the French always want to go back to Article 5. And paradoxically, it makes them come back to Russia, in a sense, without talking about Russia too much. If that sounds a bit convoluted, that's because it's French, but I think there's a logic to it. And at the end of the day, what matters is that we avoid having big, major strategic disagreements among allies and challenges of the day. It's okay to have nuances. It's okay to have complementary approaches. What we will need to avoid is major strategic divergences. And I don't think we will have many. Just let me conclude by one word. But I'd like to remind this audience that even though I do agree with Hans and Ben on about what they said about the fact that the transatlantic relation is going to develop in a completely different atmosphere, let's recall the Clinton administration. My point of reference is not so much Obama as the Clinton years. Clinton years, you had a very empathic president, Bill Clinton, that we all loved in Europe, but we had major disagreements. I'm sure General Hodges remembers that, about how much the US would commit itself to peacekeeping and peacemaking in the Balkans. That was not only due to the administration, that was also the US Congress. So we had major strategic disagreements on the extraterritorial nature of US legislation regarding sanctions, Iran, Cuba, etc. So Democrats in power does not necessarily mean a bed of roses for transatlantic relations. But if we have disagreements, and we will have some, we will be able to handle them among adults, as one of you said, and that's already something.
Mr. Stein, how much, from your position there in Brussels, how much do these divergences actually serve as a strain on transatlantic relations? Because if we look at one of those big points of disagreement, perhaps we could say so far, is policy towards China. And we know that economic policy is linked, of course, to political influence as well. So how much do you think that's going to be a strain going forward working with the Biden administration?
I think it's natural that now we can discuss all these issues, be it China, be it Russia, be it the other challenges that are around. We can discuss them with an ally, with a partner. And we don't have to wait for a tweet on Twitter early in the morning. But we are discussing it with our partners, and I think it was a very good start that the Secretary of State participated in the exchange of EU foreign affairs ministers, and that he listened to all 27 of them. I mean, it's not the EU is not just, I mean, there are two big countries, and that's our dear friends in France and Germany, but there are 25 others. And I think this is something that, this is some homework that we Europeans have to do. We also have to start and come to conclusions, to have a debate like, what is our standpoint on China? What is the Chinese influence in Africa, which is our neighboring continent? And I think that there is some homework that we have to do, and we cannot just say it's the American president, Donald Trump, that we cannot come to terms with, but now it's on us, and we also have to show that we are able to find solutions for all the problems that are around and discuss them with our partners in the US.
General Hodges, if I could pick up on that with you, it seems like there's a lot of convergence and points of agreement when it comes to security and defense, at least the reaffirming of NATO as the backbone of the security infrastructure. And so we've heard a lot of that from the new defense minister in the US and of course across the European Union as well. Is that lip service, or is that really the case that there seems to be a lot of agreement there and common ground?
Well, thinking about where so many of your audience, our audience is tonight there in Nordrhein-Westfalen, to show you America's commitment, we've got one of our best diplomats. Fiona Evans is the consul general right there in Nordrhein-Westfalen. So she's equal to having an armored division of American power there, just with a great diplomat like her. But look, this is about great power competition. And I really do believe great power competition prevents great power conflict, because when you compete in the diplomatic sphere in the information sphere and in the economic sphere, you're not just military, you're conveying to potential adversaries, this matters, we care about this. And I think that the United States, working with France and Germany and the rest of the European Union, as well as other European allies, the UK, there's no reason that we can't provide a better 5G network, for example, that competes against Huawei instead of resorting to sanctions all the time. I'd rather see us come up with another solution to Nord Stream 2 versus sanctions on allies. But we can't just, all of us can't just pay lip service to the idea of cooperation. I think that the United States, in terms of our military commitment, you heard the president, not only did he stop the the proposed withdrawal that was announced by the previous administration of troops from Germany, he also removed the cap, meaning there's no self-imposed limit. The principal limit will be, number one, the willingness of Germany to host American soldiers and Air Force here. And then number two, what's the strategic requirement? I was thrilled, obviously, to see that nothing was going to be pulled out. I think we need a lot more capability here. But fortunately, Germany provides a very good platform at Ramstein and Stuttgart, Wiesbaden, Kaiserslautern, Vilsack, Grafenwehr. These places are so important, Spangdahlem, to America, but also to the alliance. This is how we project power into Africa, into the Middle East, as well as to help our European allies. So that commitment is strong. And Bruno mentioned earlier the Congress. He's exactly right. The Congress, especially over the last 4 years, has taken a much more active role in foreign policy than maybe I've seen in the past, because they were worried about the direction the president was going.
Just to follow quickly up on that, General Hodges, you had mentioned to me once that you could see Germany's role, for example, in NATO and in this debate about 2% defense spending, that Germany could take on a greater logistical role in its commitment to NATO. Is that something that you think the Biden administration would be open to? Look,
thanks for bringing that up. So and I think the German Defense Minister, Minister Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, deserves huge credit for what she and General Zorn, the General Inspector of the Bundeswehr, just recently released, trying to start or initiate what has been needed in Germany for a long time, which is a public debate about how Germans see themselves strategically in the world. She mentioned that Germany had three roles from a security standpoint. One was a nation on which smaller nations could depend. The second role was as the hub, which really, for me, is important because of the transit nature. Everything that would come into Europe in a crisis or pre-crisis has to come in through Germany. So it provides this sort of a transport hub. And then the third role that she proposed was as first responder to protect the perimeter of NATO and the European Union. Look, there's a lot of people that will not be happy about that, but she's trying to initiate the debate that needs to take place about how Germans see themselves in the world. And for the first time in German history, I think you're surrounded only by friends on every border. It's friends, and so Germany has to rethink its role, I think.
Mr. Tertrais, if I could come to you and talk to you about something of a word salad, this concept of strategic autonomy and European sovereignty, which you've just written about in the Spiegel this week. And I would recommend to anyone who's joining this discussion to take a look at that. It was really interesting. What does that mean to you, if you could kind of sum it up for us, the need for European strategic autonomy and European sovereignty as two sides of the same coin, as you put it?
Yeah, frankly, I was a little tired of this ongoing debate about defining autonomy versus sovereignty. I don't think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it detracts us from the real question. And the real question is, in fact, the one you're addressing. indirectly, what do we want as Europeans to be able to do on our own? And this is not a French idea. Now it's a European one, because since 2016, the EU official documents mention it. So I'm always a bit annoyed when some commentator in the US talks about it as the French are pushing for this. No, it's a European idea. What is clear now is that it cannot be, and it should not be something which competes with NATO. You know, I've been repeating this for more than 20 years, literally. And I'm always flabbergasted when I read or hear an American commentator who says, oh, the French want to destroy, replace NATO. That's not the point. The point is about what do we want as Europeans to be able to do on our own. The question of sovereignty is allegedly slightly different. Sovereignty relates also to issues like what Ben referred to, 5G. Do we want to be dependent on the Chinese? No, we don't. We should not. And I don't think we will. So it's not only the question of autonomy and sovereignty, it's not only about military action. It's not only about being able to do something on our own. If the United States does not want to, cannot, is busy somewhere else. I think the crux of the matter on defense, and again, I'm sure that this is an issue that Ben knows very well, is that the logical consequence of that for the French and for many Europeans is buying more European and buying less American. And because I was mentioning the Clinton administration years, because these debates come back over and over. The Clinton administration, just like the Biden administration, is sympathetic to this idea of, hey, it's more burden sharing, we're fine with that, as long as the assets you're developing are also useful for NATO, which they are. 90% of them will be. But here comes the rub. There will always be a US-European and particularly US-French, but not only US-French, dispute about how much this should mean buying more European, buying less American. I understand our American friends and allies want us to buy American. They should understand that we want ourselves to buy more European. It's the only way that we'll maintain a strong European defense industry. At the same time, it's also true that buying American assets is also a way to maintain that military, industrial, and strategic coupling. So this will continue to be a debate, but just to conclude on this point, I'm throwing the ball back to us, because it's up to us Europeans to clarify to our American and Canadian partners, what do we want to be able to achieve on our own?
Mr. Hodges, I think you wanted to comment there.
Just a slight divergence from Bruno. I don't think the French military has anything from the United States. I mean, not a beret, not a pistol, not a bullet, nothing, not a canteen. And the Bundeswehr also has almost nothing from the Americans. So of course, what we would like is to be able to compete. We want to be able to compete in the European market for in defense industry, but also in automobiles and in everything else. And I think this is where some of the pressure is going to come from the administration. They're going to look to Germany and France to help address the trade imbalance between the United States and the European Union that's around 120-something billion. Now, there are very real and fair arguments to make about, okay, well, let's count everything. You know, are services counted in these imbalances? You know, everything is not about hard manufactured items. But I think that capitalists believe in competition. True capitalists believe in competition. And so that's what the United States is going to want, is to be able to compete, but also figuring out how do we work together. And this is not about Germany and France having to choose between China or the United States. But I mean, let's be clear about the Chinese and how they not only steal technology, but also they're not transparent in the way that a German business is required to be transparent, or a French business is required to be transparent, holding them accountable. And I think we can only do that if we are all kind of working together because we all want access to the Chinese market, of course, and everybody listening tonight has multiple items that were made in China. So that's a reality.
Go ahead, Mr. Stein.
If I just may add, I mean, you're right that a lot is about competition, and competition is also the engine of progress. But on the other side, right recently with the development of the vaccines, we have seen that we are very good at cooperating. Taking BioNTech Pfizer, this is a cooperation of a German startup company and a big American player. And it's produced, at least it's produced in the US as well as in Europe. There we see that, I mean, we are not cooperating with a Chinese or a Russian laboratory, but there is a cooperation between these, between the US and the European side. I think there are more challenges, and maybe with all our efforts now to overcome these crises, this pandemic, with the money that we are pouring into modernizing our infrastructure on the European side, and what you have to do on the US side as well, there is a big chance to rejuvenate both our economies.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Mr. Tertrais, if I could follow up quickly on your point about strategic autonomy, you had made the point that it's often seen as a French initiative, and it is rather a European initiative. Yet, in your op-ed, you also say that the German Defense Minister, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, that she herself misunderstood what this term actually means. And we've seen again that there's now this joint initiative again between Germany and France to restart talks about the development of a common fighter jet program, and that has been very controversial, or been discussed in a controversial way in the past. How much unity is there in Europe between Germany and France on working together?
Well, let me differentiate between two different issues that you just mentioned. Despite the media and the commentators, including people like myself, who are always eager to find significant differences between Berlin and Paris and some of these big political projects, I think what you're referring to, the fact that Defense Minister AKK apparently disagreed with President Macron, I think that it's all about nuances. This is not a major strategic disagreement. So I don't think we should make a lot of these apparent differences. When she said, we will need, I disagree on strategic autonomy because we will still need the United States for our defense. The French don't disagree with that. So I thought it was more of a misunderstanding. The defense-industrial relation is more complex. And the future air combat system is in fact an area which is proving once again full of hurdles that I think the French, the Germans, and the Spanish will be able to overcome. But when we Europeans launch these big ticket major cooperation programs, it's always very complex. This one is, I think, one that we cannot fail. We cannot afford to fail. But it is difficult indeed. And some of the again, the reason I'm mentioning the two issues is because precisely I don't think there is a huge divergence in vision between the French and German. But when it comes down to defense industrial cooperation, it's often more difficult.
General Hodges, how is this debate looked at from Washington's perspective? If you could help us see through that lens, this idea of a joint European army down the road. Is this an irritant to the Biden administration?
I think, honestly, it's generally seen as an empty rhetorical device. Let's just say tomorrow morning, all the leaders of the members of the European Union decided we're now the European Army. That will not increase defense spending by €1. I mean, so doing that is not going to change defense spending. What will change defense spending and defense investment is political leaders, our elected officials, being honest with their populations about what the threats are. I mean, that's where it all starts. And if you're not willing to acknowledge that there is a potential threat, this doesn't mean that anything is inevitable or even probable, but if you're not willing to acknowledge that there's a potential threat, then nobody's going to do what needs to be done to invest in preventing that conflict or that potential conflict from ever happening. So based on, there's so much talk about doing it, but yet very, very few nations actually take the steps to bring it to life. I think people are mostly skeptical. They don't think much about it. I think there is some disappointment probably, and I'm not the spokesman for the administration, so just to be clear, there's probably a little bit of a letdown after watching Mr. Borrell get treated so badly by Minister Lavrov. That was embarrassing. And then today, the big announcement of 4 people are being sanctioned for the poisoning, attempted poisoning of Mr. Navalny. 4 people. I mean, that doesn't exactly inspire people that the EU is going to be tough on the Kremlin when it comes to human rights, for example, and rule of law, and so I think there's a little bit of disappointment there.
Can I inject, Sumi, if I may, can I inject a couple of words here? I largely agree with Ben on that. I hope that the Borrell trip will be kind of a wake-up call. Targeted sanctions, sometimes it's targeting the right Russian or Chinese or whatever individuals, can actually hurt more than something more visible. So I don't think that the number matters, but I agree with you, Ben. If Europe wants to matter, wants to be relevant, there are 2 things it needs to do. First of all, draw lessons from the kind of episodes that happened with Mr. Josep Borrell in Moscow, which was a humiliation. Now, I'm a little tired of the Putin, the Kremlin apologists, which tell us that allegedly we keep on humiliating Russia. I think we are the ones being humiliated. That's point 1. And point 2, I entirely agree with Ben. At the end of the day, what matters more than anything else is how much we are willing to spend on our defense and security, because that's the only way that we will be relevant. That's the only way that we will keep NATO alive and our US partners confident in us fulfilling our part of the bargain. And finally, 3, it's also the only way we'll be able to have capabilities which are also usable in a European framework if need be. However, we should not focus too much on the 2%. I've always hated the 2%. I think what matters is capabilities more than numbers. And the 2% is even less meaningful, sorry, with the pandemic because of the contraction of our GDPs. So as much as I support the idea of if Europe wants to be relevant in each and every respect, it does need to maintain a strong defense security investment. But by all means, let's avoid focusing too much on the %.
Just quickly, Mr. Tertrais, what is the right way to measure then these contributions, if it's not some arbitrary number of 2%?
There's no magic number. It cannot be one single number. It's about the combination of abilities, capabilities. It's about a list of capabilities. And I'm sorry, but it doesn't make you can't write it on a t-shirt, all right? Or you can't make it in a tweet. Even a tweet is not enough. You need a thread. So you can't measure it with one single number.
Mr. Stein, how do all of these points, how are they being discussed in Brussels? We heard from General Hodges talking about some of the disappointment with how the EU foreign policy chief was treated in Moscow and some of the discussions about defense spending. What does the debate look like there?
Maybe it's a debate that is too slowly, especially for our friends in Washington, D.C. But on the other hand, I tend to look at a glass that is half full instead of empty. And I think over the last couple of years, the Europeans have made huge progress in coming together and in acting together, also in the field of the military. But I think we can go steps further. Maybe, I mean, you were talking about the European army and that it would not increase defense spending. True, maybe not, but it could increase efficiency. And by increasing efficiency, increasing your capabilities, we would already gain a lot. So, so I think we are. I mean, maybe it's too slowly, but we are going in the right direction, and thus then we have two pillars of a strong NATO alliance. One is in Europe, and the other one is what the US is delivering.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. And just for our audience here, Mr. Tertrais will be right back. He's just briefly away from his screen. And it's a good point for me to remind everyone as well that you can send us your questions in the Q&A section here in Zoom. And we have a few coming in. We'll get to them in just a second when Mr. Tertrais rejoins us. General Hodges, one of the discussions around one of the reasons why there needs to be a more agile and independent security force in whatever form that looks like here in Europe is to be able to deal with regions where there aren't shared strategic interests with the Americans. So for example, the Sahel. Do you think that would be an effective and also welcome approach to dealing with security challenges?
Well, first of all, the United States doesn't have the authority or desire to limit France or UK or Germany from doing any of these things that you're talking about, such as in the Sahel or in the Balkans or in the Middle East. The United States respects the sovereign rights of each of those nations, as well as authorities of the European Union. So the US is not preventing or limiting any of that. The EU has had a standing battle group for years. It's always had the authority. It has a force that's trained, certified, ready to go. It rotates amongst the nations. It's been employed 0 times, never. So it's always had the ability to do that. And frankly, to be candid, it's the United States Air Force that provides much of the necessary strategic lift to support France and other allies in the Sahel. Now, this is a good thing. I mean, working together, allies working together. And frankly, the United States does not have the capacity to do everything that needs to be done to meet all the needs. So that's why you've heard Secretary Austin talk about the importance of allies. You've heard the president on his inaugural speech talk about the importance of allies. And that was important because you can imagine every special interest and stakeholder on the planet wants to get their thing into the inaugural speech. And so the fact that the president addressed the importance of allies in his inaugural speech says a lot. The European pillar, I think that Hans addressed, is exactly what we need. A pillar that's built around France, Germany, and the UK, so that not for us, but the fact is China, we see China as the long-term strategic rival. And if we are to prevent a conflict with China, much of our capability, our capacity is going to be there, as well as in protecting the global commons in the Middle East, all the other challenges that are out there. And so we need a strong European pillar, not a pillow, that can continue to deter the Kremlin from taking advantage of the US perhaps being distracted or fixed somewhere else. And I think that's why there's such a sense of urgency on seeing Europe rediscover its unity and ability to recognize a threat and deal with it.
I can bring in a question now from somebody who's joining us for this discussion tonight, Falk Ostermann from the University of Gießen, who has a question to both General Hodges and Bruno Tertrais on the German role in NATO and how the Biden-Harris administration will react to European efforts at redefining 2%, as we were just discussing. And his question is, even with more German logistics responsibilities, how will the US administration confront German uneasiness with military expenditure, fighting and defense, and how will it apply pressure? So how far will it go to accommodate Germany? Maybe both of you could take a stab at that.
I'm not sure I want to comment on German-American cooperation. I do want to make a slight comment on the differences in strategic and military cultures in Europe. A long time ago, I worked in the French Ministry of Defense, and we saw it as one of our missions to help Germany becoming a military power again, because we are no longer afraid as French. We are no longer afraid of Germany. We welcome a German military effort, and we want Germany to become more active militarily around the globe. However, there will always be, Germany cannot be France and France cannot be Germany, and that's okay. We complement each other. I will let my German and American colleagues answer the other part of the question. Can I just say how important French-American cooperation is in Africa? And it's okay, as the general put it, as Ben put it, we have common interests, we help each other, and that's okay, and it works very well. But indeed, the idea of autonomy also relates to the fact that sometimes the French think, gee, I wish I had more drones, so I was not that dependent on my good American ally. Because you know what? There could always be a Trump. What if tomorrow there's an American president who decides, what, we're still in the Sahel? What are we doing there? Please, the Pentagon, I ask you to withdraw our forces from the Sahel. It's the kind of circumstances that make us feel more comfortable and being a little more autonomous. But that's not to detract in any way, shape, or form the importance of US support and US-French military cooperation in the Sahel, which is largely quite often under the radar, and most often it's extremely important and works very well for the interests of both countries. And I think also for the interests of Europe. That may be a bit of a French view.
I'd like to just echo everything that Bruno just said. I don't disagree with any of it. I think there's probably 3 or 4 things that the administration or that Americans would like to see or expect from the Bundeswehr and the German Ministry of Defense. Number one, you've alluded to the logistics, Germany being the sort of the transit hub for the entire alliance. And I think a real argument could be made for improvements in infrastructure, transportation capabilities that are necessary for the alliance. I think there ought to be a formula where that counts towards 2%. Right now, there are just enough trains on Deutsche Bahn cargo that we all use, everybody, just enough capacity to move 1.5 armor brigades simultaneously. That's pathetic. Now, that's not DB Cargo's fault. But somebody has got to invest in more rail capacity if we are going to be able to move fast enough to prevent a crisis from happening. So we need more rail. The second thing, and by the way, in that transportation sort of concept, that also includes cyber protection for transportation network. I mean, Bremerhaven is essential for us. Being able to move large bulk things up and down the Rhine River, essential for us. Being able to move throughout Europe, essential for us as well as the rest of NATO. If all of these networks are not protected from cyber attack, then we will grind to a halt. And a cyber strike is just as devastating in terms of effect as an Iskander missile landing on top of Bremerhaven. And so I think this cyber protection should also count. I think that Germany, the number one priority has got to be what we call readiness. What you have should work. Every unit should be fully manned with women and men, with soldiers and sailors. And this is I don't think we need to see a bigger Bundeswehr, but everything that the Bundeswehr has should be operating at the right level that every officer I know from the Bundeswehr wants and knows how to do, but they've got to have the right civilian support and the financing to do that. The last place that I think where Germany and the Netherlands could carry a bigger load is on air and missile defense. Whatever system, this is not about buying Patriot, whatever system they choose to use. But the Baltic countries cannot afford the high-end missile defense systems. But I think Germany and the Netherlands, this is a role for helping to protect Central Europe is something that the administration would like to see.
Thank you for those answers. I have a few more questions coming in here that I want to bring into the discussion. One from somebody whose name is not listed, but the question is, good evening from Central Europe. Why didn't France choose to make use of the framework nation concept in order to increase, like Germany, cooperation with European partners?
Oh, I'm not sure I'm best placed to answer that question. I deal a lot with defense security, but I also deal with a lot of other issues, and I'm not in the position to answer that question. I will say this, though. I think the French have proven to be much more pragmatic and flexible over the past 5 years than they were in the past. For instance, by this initiative called the European Intervention Initiative, which is open to everybody outside the EU, which seeks to complement the PESCO. On the framework nation concept, I believe the French support it, but I can't be much more informative on this particular question.
Okay, thank you. And I think that question must have been directed to you, Mr. Tertrais. Thank you for answering. And I have a question or comment and question here from Tobias Fischer, who thanks you all for the discussion as well, and asks, how should the Western community deal with the Kremlin? Is a containment strategy necessary? And that's for the group.
Hans, Bruno, go first, but I'll be glad to.
I mean, this is my personal opinion, is that the president in the Kremlin only understands tough language, and we have to come together and act together. What happened last week should not happen again. And we have to make that clear. I mean, it's also, I mean, it's going to be an interesting year in Russia as well with the upcoming elections, and sometimes people who are getting nervous act like the current administration is acting in the Kremlin. But the Europeans have to act together and speak a clear language.
Can I just add that before containment comes unity? The first thing to do is to avoid giving the Kremlin opportunities for creating or fostering divisions among us. That's something the current regime in Russia is very good at. And we have to be careful. It's okay to have open strategic disagreements among allies. You know, that's what Western liberal countries are about. But we have to be very careful. And this is why I'm personally very uncomfortable with the whole Nord Stream 2 issue, because I understand the logic of the project. I also understand why people are opposed to it. I just hope that with the adults in the rooms, both in Berlin and Washington, we will find the right way to handle the future of this project, one way or the other. I'm not, you know, it's a German project. One way or the other, it has to be managed in ways that does not inflate or create divisions. It's typically the sort of thing that the Kremlin is very good at exploiting, if and when it can.
Sumi, would you please read that question again?
Absolutely. This question from Tobias Fischer was, what is the best way for the Western community to deal with the Kremlin? Is it a containment strategy? Is that necessary?
Okay, so I think it was either Hans or Bruno said exactly the right thing. The first step is unity, that working together, I think that's what the Kremlin respects the most, is when they look over and they see France, Germany, the United States, the UK, the Netherlands, all of us common in our view that, yes, of course, we want to work with Russia. What a great country, unlimited resources, such an amazing culture. The Russian people have been treated worse by their own leadership than any of the other poor countries on the periphery. I mean, over the last 100+ years. But I think that the Kremlin, whoever's in the Kremlin, really only respects strength. And so if we want to be able to prevent these conflicts, it's about holding them accountable for respecting the sovereignty and international law. But if we're not working together, then those cracks that Bruno alluded to are there, and the Kremlin is expert on exploiting them. You know, we the West have such a better story to tell. I mean, we should be crushing them in the information space competition. I mean, think about what young people in Nordrhein-Westphalia or all over France or in the Netherlands and Denmark and the United States. Look at what young people are able to do because they're turned loose to develop their potential. That's such a better story, not a perfect story. I mean, we certainly have plenty of faults, but we still have a better story to tell. And if we can live up to our own talking points, then I think we win hands down.
Thank you, General Hodges, for that. We are running out of time, and so just in the few minutes that we have left, I'll ask one of these beloved lightning round questions to all of you, which is, you know, if you could draw up your priority or wish list to put in front of the leaders in Germany and France, but also in Washington, of the biggest priority on transatlantic security. So your biggest priority for the coming weeks and months, not 3 years down the road, but now. What would that be? What would that list look like, particularly that top priority? Mr. Stein, maybe we could start with you there.
I think I'd like to pick up on what Ben just mentioned. The big challenge for all of us is defending the freedom, a society that is based on the rule of law, against all those who are playing with disinformation, who are trying or who want to disunite us. That there is a big chance that with the new administration, we can rebuild, get re-engaged, define a joint strategy against all these enemies of free and open societies. And that is the big challenge that lies ahead, and but also the good opportunity that we have to start and act together.
General Hodges?
So I'm going to echo what our president said last Friday as a priority, said that we are at an inflection point in history, that it's about autocracy versus democracy, and that democracy has to prevail. And the way we prevail is by delivering for our own people. That's how you stop the growth of autocracy, is when liberal democracies with robust opposition parties, transparency, all the institutions of liberal democracy, when those are strong and vibrant, will always triumph. And so I think the president, that will influence everything that he does for the next 4 years, including how we deal with China, the Chinese Communist Party leadership, how we deal with the Kremlin, how we deal with Iran, and also how we deal with our allies.
And Mr. Tertrais?
If your question is about the coming weeks, my answer is going to be very simple and twofold, and very focused but twofold. One, ensuring that so-called vaccine diplomacy does not allow China and Russia to make inroads in countries which will become actually more dependent on them because quite often, unfortunately, Chinese vaccines come with a price tag, so to say, and that increases the dependency of countries. So that's happening now, so that's a priority. And my second priority is very simple. A difficult challenge, it's one which, on which everything should be based. The challenges of the coming decade suppose that we rebuild post-pandemic healthy economies and societies. We will have taken a big bruising. I think Western liberal societies are incredibly resilient. So I'm betting on the fact that we will be able to prevail. It's not a military competition, but the success story of the liberal countries will continue. But for this to happen, our societies will need to regroup and heal, not only economically, but also socially. That's a common challenge, but that's a challenge that we need to tackle before and in order to be able to tackle all the other ones.
I think that's an excellent point to end on. Thank you, gentlemen, for a very frank and open and dynamic discussion about some of these transatlantic challenges. I think it comes at a crucial time, as well as some of these challenges are being shaped by on both sides of the Atlantic. I want to thank as well, again, the Amerika House and the Naumann Stiftung and the Institut Français and also the Cassis. And I would like to bring in Landry Charrier from the Institut Français, who will deliver a few closing remarks for us now.
Yes, thank you very much, dear Sumi Somaskanda, for your excellent moderation and for now giving me the opportunity to make a few closing remarks. Over the last few weeks, we have heard a lot about the global positioning of the US under the new administration and the strategy the European Union should pursue to translate the hope brought by the new administration into an effective transatlantic agenda. In today's shifting geopolitical landscape, there is no alternative to strong transatlantic cooperation. This does not mean that we have to share common positions on every single question. On the contrary, the success of the new agenda will depend on our ability to withstand discord and to embrace different opinions. For the US, it will require accepting that the days of their undisputed leadership are gone. For the European Union, it will require accepting a more uncomfortable relationship with our ally. In this context, we need to launch new initiatives to strengthen our political and strategic dialogue. We need to create a new framework of discussions to clarify our positions and find a way to cooperate wherever possible. I'm really happy we could contribute to this within our lecture series, Franco-German Strategic Dialogue. Let me now thank our distinguished panelists for this engaging discussion. Stein, Ben Hodges, and Bruno Tertrais. I also want to thank you, Sumi, for having guided us through the evening. Last but not least, I would like to express my gratitude to our partners for the successful cooperation. Dr. Benjamin Becker and Katharina Kiefer from the Amerika House NRW, Iris Müller from the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung für die Freiheit, and Dr. Enrico Fels from the Cassis at the University of Bonn. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. It was a great pleasure working together. I wish you now all a nice evening.
Thanks to all. Vielen Dank. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Bye-bye.